Emily, hey, welcome to Growing Pains. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I am super excited to dive in. For all of the folks that are listening, can you tell us a little bit about your family and the business that you have?
Sure. So I am a mom of two young girls, ages 4 and 6, married to my husband of 15 years. And I own a maternal mental health therapy practice. So I'm a psychologist and I specialize in working with pretty much any families that are navigating everything from preconception to pregnancy, postpartum to postpartum. And I have a therapy practice where we serve 40 states.
That's incredible. What got you started in maternal mental health?
It was really my own journey. I was practicing as a psychologist before I had my first child, and I was very naive and kind of thinking that I mean, I knew the statistics 1 in 5 women experience a perinatal mental health condition, but I never thought that I would be the 1 in 5. And then when I did have my first child and I really struggled with my mental health afterwards, it took me a really long time to acknowledge that that's what was going on and to seek help. And I knew that if I, even with my background in mental health, if I was struggling with so much internalized stigma and shame, I can only imagine what, other moms are experiencing. So that really led me to pivot my practice and respecialize, get more training and education in this area, and then start my current practice, Phoenix Health, where I support parents that are going through that.
I love the name too, like Phoenix. I feel like that's so visually supportive of the experience of like becoming a parent. Like you really do like kind of break yourself totally down in order to come back up and be so much better. Why do you think there is such a stigma around these mental health challenges? I mean, 1 in 5 is a pretty striking number. And I know like the conversation has really just started to open up about really the full spectrum of emotions that could indicate depression or anxiety, postpartum. Why do you think the stigma still exists?
I think for a long time, there's been this narrative that having a baby is the happiest, most joyful event in your life. And while I mean, it is such a beautiful thing, that narrative has really excluded the emotional part of it that a lot of people experience. And that's led a lot of people who do struggle with their mental health after having a baby to feel like, what about me? Or I'm the only one, just to feel shame to share it when everyone around you is kind of saying like, "Aren't you so in love? Isn't this the best thing that you've ever experienced?" And when your experience is not consistent with that, it's very confusing.
Yeah, I think I picture, like birth announcements and early stages postpartum on like Instagram or any social media platform, right? You're just like, oh, yay, newborn snuggles and the house is clean and all the things. And I remember being postpartum with our first son, and I was just like, I don't look anything like this. Like, I haven't showered in days, let alone washed my hair. And it just always felt so chaotic and it felt so confronting, frankly, to like pull the curtain back and kind of share what it's actually like. So what I'd love to do maybe is like kind of talk through some of the most like common indicators because I remember for us, I had no idea that like anger was a sign of postpartum anxiety. And I was like angry at little things like, stubbing my toe really quick when I was like walking because I was always barefoot in my house because we were just, hanging out with a newborn, or like angry that like we'd ordered food or something. And I know these are all like very first world problems, but the food delivery was late and I was like super hungry and I was like, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to eat before I have to breastfeed again or whatever. Right. And so I had no idea until I started doing some research that anger actually does point to signs of having postpartum anxiety. Right. So, like, what are some of the most common things that you do see that might be early stage signs of, hey, actually, I may be going through something with my mental health postpartum?
So, postpartum anxiety is actually the most common perinatal mental health condition. A lot of people think it's postpartum depression because we talk about it more, but it's actually postpartum anxiety. And postpartum anxiety is really a sense of worry or fear, often related to the baby. So, just a lot of worries, a lot of fears, a lot of stress around if something could happen to the baby, or even that you could do something that could cause harm to the baby. It also presents along with other symptoms, like you mentioned, the anger or the irritability. Those are really common symptoms of both anxiety and depression that we don't really talk enough about. It can also present with difficulty sleeping. It's hard to sleep if your thoughts are racing. You can feel very on edge, and it can affect your ability to make decisions, to focus, and just to, just overall feel like yourself. Postpartum depression, on the other hand, is more of a low mood or a sadness that really persists. And it's accompanied by a lot of the other symptoms of postpartum anxiety. Like there can be irritability, difficulty focusing, difficulty sleeping. Some people sleep too much, others sleep too little, changes in your appetite. And in really more severe cases, there might be thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore. A lot of times, postpartum anxiety and depression do actually occur together. And I'd say when in the moms that I work with, I often see there's elements of both. It's rarely just one or the other.
Do you see some of these feelings starting either during pregnancy or during, the months prior trying to conceive?
Yeah, I would say it's really a mixed bag, at least with the families that I work with. For some people, pregnancy is the first time that they experience an episode of anxiety or depression. Certainly for families that are going through infertility, having trouble trying to conceive, that's extremely stressful and that can put them at risk for an anxiety or depressive disorder prior to pregnancy. And then there are some families who it really hits them just postpartum, that they feel good throughout their entire pregnancy, and then the baby comes, and then they're hit with the baby blues, and then the baby blues just never really get better from there.
What about postpartum? I know you mentioned that kind of jokingly before, but what's the range after having a baby? I know that a lot of the rhetoric around recovery for moms postpartum is get your body back in that first 3 months or you're back to work in 3 months, right? That's like a very, very, I think, accepted range is like that fourth trimester. What's the real range of time postpartum that we're seeing some of the development of these feelings or anxieties or depression?
For mental health professionals, we define postpartum as that first year after giving
Mhm.
birth. But I have to say, as a clinician, it's not uncommon for moms to come in after that first year who have been struggling the whole time and just finally said, I've had enough and I have to do something about it. So it's not like just at that 12-month mark, you're no longer postpartum. Some people say you're postpartum forever. And I do truly believe that because it really does
Mhm.
change you. And there's parts of it that do never go away and you kind of learn to live with and adjust to. But generally we say 1 year, but it's not uncommon for people to struggle even past that 1 year.
My kids are 4 and almost 3. And I absolutely still have anxious feelings about my children, right? Are they going to be safe? Is this okay to be doing with them? Even when they play on the playground, sometimes I just can't even help it. Like I have like feelings throughout my body of like they're testing the boundaries and I don't know how it's going to end up. And I think a lot of, I don't know, normalization around that. Like when your heart lives outside of your body, it's actually very, very normal to view them and just worry and wonder if everything is going to be okay. It's just a very vulnerable space to be in. Are there things that women who are either currently pregnant or perhaps listening to this and they're postpartum, like early postpartum, are there things that we can do as parents, practices that we can keep, and things like that that can help alleviate some of those feelings of anxiety or intense sadness or any of those things?
Well, to your point, I think it's important to understand that some anxiety is normal and adaptive as a mom. I mean, it's going to keep you on your toes. You're going to be protective of your baby. So it is important to have some anxiety. We don't want it all to go away, but there is a difference between a healthy amount of anxiety and having an anxiety disorder. So, a healthy amount of anxiety, like you said, your kids are on the playground, you feel on edge, you're having maybe some intrusive thoughts, but the anxiety doesn't persist all the time and you're still able to kind of live your life and function. Whereas someone with an anxiety disorder, that anxiety is pretty chronic and they rarely get relief from it. And it really does affect their ability to feel good and to live their lives and even to enjoy being a mom. I think it's important to do the little things that help you. And I think they're very personal. So, like, for example, for me, it's 10 minutes of meditation in the morning makes a really big difference in how I'm setting up my day. But for other people, it's like having that first cup of coffee by yourself in the morning. It's a walk, it's, reading a book, whatever it is, trying to find ways to incorporate those little moments of self-care is super important. And just to be really mindful of the different things that you're doing that may be exacerbating your anxiety, like little stuff like too much caffeine, not enough
Mhm.
rest, stressing about things that you have no control over. Like all these things are just going to exacerbate your anxiety. So, more you can make those adjustments, that can really help as well.
I'm definitely the drink the coffee in the morning by yourself type of person. I like need that in order to show up as a present mom. At master maternity leave, we call it the anchor activity. So I personally love an anchor activity. So you talked about meditation, reading, journaling, something like that to kind of thread through pregnancy, postpartum, and then like getting back into like work and life and integrating that all back in because if we have some kind of thread, we can always come and sit with ourselves, right? And actually be like, okay, well, this is the consistent thing in my day. How do I feel? Because as you, I'm sure know, like motherhood is so inconsistent. Like once you feel like you've got your handle on the kids and what they're doing in their schedules or your mood and all the things, then all of a sudden everything changes or the environment shifts or their needs shift. So I love that idea of having like the anchor activity and it can change. So for me, it used to be journaling. I would journal every single morning. And I journal from time to time still, especially like through big thoughts or big feelings and big decisions I need to make inside of the business or at home. But now my anchor activity, something just like nice and lighthearted, is I've been doing like tons of Sudoku puzzles.
Mm.
I super love it. I like shut the one side of my brain off. But like if the kids ask me a question, I can like do it in their environment. I can like easily look at them, answer the question, feel like I'm still kind of there with them, but then kind of go back and retreat to like my little safe space. So that's been super fun. I want to encourage everybody listening that like if you've always loved meditation, like you do, Emily, and then that changes like postpartum and you're
Mhm.
like, wow, meditation feels like a chore for me. Start to explore other things that might be like meditation, right? Something that you can just do on your own or off to the side, takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you can kind of like check in with yourself.
I think another point is that sometimes your relationship with those activities will have to shift. Certainly, when I was newly postpartum, I finding 10 minutes by myself to meditate was impossible most days. So I did have to make adjustments. And sometimes it was while I was nursing, or it was
Mm.
a mindful walk with the stroller. And this morning, my 4-year-old crawled into bed next to me while I was mid meditation, and she just laid with me while I meditated. So we have to be flexible with it too. It's not always going to be perfect, and just to kind of go with that.
What was your experience like, Emily? Did you have your business when you were pregnant with one or both of your girls?
When I had my first child, I had just started my business and I was doing it part-time while I was also employed as a psychologist at a community
Mm.
mental health center. And then after I gave birth to my first child, I continued that pattern of part-time business owner, part-time employee. And after I had my second child, that's when I made that transition to full-time business owner.
How was that transition for you moving into kind of doing your own thing? I know that it can be scary sometimes to leap into running your own shop and having your full income be, your business. How was that for you?
It was a long time coming. I think I actually held out longer in hindsight than I probably should have. I think what really helped with some of that anxiety was that I knew that my business was going to work, that I had already established that there was a need for the work that I was doing, and I had a large demand for that need. So I knew it was time to jump all in full time. And I was pretty confident. I mean, of course, things could always change and go wrong, but I was pretty confident that my service was going to work. And I think, I know there's a lot of debate out there amongst entrepreneurs if you should go all in or if you should stay at your job and do it as kind of a side hustle while you're building it. For me, it was a little bit more of that side hustle, and it worked for me because as someone who does tend to have a lot of anxiety, it did help in knowing that I had really established this business for a couple of years before I jumped all in.
Yeah, honestly, that would be really, really helpful. I think for us, when we had our first son, my business was about 3 years old. And so I was still just kind of like on my own, doing my own thing, had my own clients. We had a handful of folks helping us, but there was really that like that moment of uncertainty and doubt, like when you leap to start a business was like 3 years delayed to when we had our son. So I remember thinking like, I wasn't scared to start this business because it was just me and my husband and, if it didn't work out, I would just get a job or whatever. And then 3 years in, I was kinda like, "Oh gosh, now we have a baby that depends on our income." And so all the things kinda just came to a head at that moment. So I actually don't think you ever escape that, like, founder leap that, like, I'm gonna be my own boss and I'm gonna run my own shop. It just sometimes it might get delayed a little bit when, like, circumstances in your life become a little bit more, I don't know, dependent, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense.
So what about now? So you have a 4 and a 6-year-old at home and a thriving, practice. What does today look like? I mean, now we're kinda talking, you're heavily out of, like, that 1-year postpartum period, with both of your daughters. What are you, like, leaning on day to day to kind of make all the things work?
Yeah, it's definitely chaotic at times, but I have to say, being now 4 years removed from postpartum, I give families so much credit, moms, dads, anyone who has a child that starts a business during those first couple of years. It's a lot, and I mean, it's even
Mhm.
hard now, but I do feel like my kids are a little bit more self-sufficient, so and they've always seen me work, so I can let them know I have a couple of emails to write. I need 10 minutes. And generally, they'll understand and respect that. Of course, not always. There's always interruptions, but they're starting to learn what work means. It's always been a work in progress with me to have boundaries around my work, especially because I do work remotely from home. I think a lot of remote employees and business owners kind of struggle with this. It's like, where does home start and stop, and where does
Yeah.
work start and stop? So that's something that I'm kind of always working on. But I personally structure my day kind of 9 to 5 because I find that that works well with my kids being in school and with some of their activities. And some days I'll adjust and I'll pick one up to go to gymnastics or do an activity or something like that. But generally, it's kind of a 9 to 5 so that I can really try to clock out at 5.
I love that you guys do remote work. So with your patients and all of those types of things, are you guys predominantly meeting on Zoom and doing like virtual sessions like this?
Yeah, all of our sessions are done via telehealth. And I find that the population that we work with, because we are working with a lot of new parents, it's so much more
Mm.
convenient for them to have an appointment online versus having to go to an office.
Yeah, we did telehealth when I was working with a postpartum therapist with our first son, Frank. We did telehealth because it was actually during COVID. So we had Frank, our first son, was born in August of 2020, and I probably would have gone in person to an office had we not been in that like season of the world. But we started doing telehealth visits, and honestly, I will never go back. Like anything I've ever invested in with like business therapy, personal therapy, anything, I've always from now on just done it virtually. Do you have anybody who's like, "I really wanna come in and see somebody in person?"
Honestly, I don't have any. I can't think of the last time that a postpartum mom said that she wants to come in person. Sometimes I'll get other people that'll request it, but postpartum families, no. And, personally for me, when I had my first child and I dealt with postpartum depression, I didn't seek out therapy until I was 8 months postpartum. And a big part
Mm,
of that, besides all the stigma and shame and everything, was that I couldn't imagine getting myself to an office and putting that on my calendar
mm.
and being away from my baby that long or having to arrange childcare for her so that I could go to an appointment. So that's why I feel like this is so especially important because the access has really been a barrier for a long time.
Yeah, I can imagine it's more accessible from, like, a time perspective, from a financial perspective, right? We're not, like, holding physical office, so we don't need to charge more for our services. That's so incredible, I think, to also think through maybe prepping for postpartum. So I remember a specific thing that I did because I didn't seek out postpartum therapy either until my son was about 6 months, our first son. And it was just, I was getting angry and I was like, I should probably have somebody to talk to like through this, right? It just felt like a prudent thing. And I'd invested in my business in like coaching or different types of things for like professional development. I was like, why don't I invest in my personal development? So I got some sessions booked with a therapist, specifically around postpartum support. And I remember her telling me that a lot of her clients will book her before they even have their baby. So, like the first couple of weeks postpartum or the first couple of months, just as a proactive measure to like have the session. And then if they felt like they needed it, they would do it. And if they didn't, then they didn't. And I think that was a really, really great piece of advice because I actually did something similar when we had our second son, is I was really into journaling, like I said at that time. And I would write down all of these like positive affirmations, like, he's going to be okay. Like Steve's just trying to help my husband and like all these different things that like I know in my brain, but then emotionally I would get like really overwhelmed by. And that also helped me too to just like read these like little love notes from myself to be like, you're doing great. The floors can stay dirty. It's not a big deal. And so that was also cool, I think, to have like set up in advance.
Yeah, I love that. And I love when clients are open to that. That's definitely something that we recommend. Just put the appointment on the books. Of course, we don't know what life is going to be like when you're 2, 3, 4 weeks postpartum, but just put the appointment on the books. And if you need to
Mhm.
cancel it, just let me know beforehand and we'll figure that out. But it's hard when you're in the thick of it then to pick up the phone or to write out the email and reach out for help. So let's just be proactive in putting it on the calendar.
Yeah, I totally love that. Have you seen, Emily, like second, third, fourth time moms, maybe they have an okay go of it with their first kiddo, but then the second might feel a little bit different, or they might be overwhelmed with, bringing baby home and they have a toddler also to take care of.
Yeah, I think it's really different for every family. And again, there's this debate between what's harder, 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3. Everyone will give
Yeah.
you a different answer. But people's life circumstances can change a lot too from one baby to another. So whereas maybe they had a good support system in place with the first, maybe they've had some losses as they welcome their second and they don't have as much support there or whatever it may be, that can make it more challenging. But certainly the stress of caring for a toddler and a newborn at the same time is definitely something that comes up for a lot of people seeking help.
Yeah. I remember thinking, even with our second pregnancy, I was like, I have to bend over and like pick up a toddler. And I remember being like so much more sore and achy and all the things when I was carrying my second son because there was just so much more to do. Outside of speaking to someone who could potentially like talk through some of the challenges and the feelings, what other like immediate postpartum support do you typically recommend for moms? I remember meals were like a big one for us, especially because like a lot of I think the personal challenges that I had with like managing emotions and those types of things also came from physiological issues. So, like lack of sleep, food. I was like holding my pee for way too long. TMI, probably for some listening, but like I think a lot of moms can agree you like your needs are just absolutely last. So, yeah, what other things do you recommend in terms of just like full scope care to make sure that we can manage these emotions? Steve, my husband, always says I get hangry, and I agree with him.
I feel you. I get pretty hangry too. The meals are a great one. I think if you could plan ahead for meals or have a meal train, that can make a big difference. And, preparing postpartum, like putting systems in your household in place and having really open conversations with your partner about what the roles are going to look like when the new baby's here. Everything down to who's going to do the laundry, who's going to get the groceries, who's going to do the housework, who's going to wake up with the baby, who's going to schedule the doctor's appointments. Like all these things can be very overwhelming, especially for someone who's prone to anxiety. So putting those systems in place can be really helpful. So everyone kind of knows what their roles are. And then continuing to check in with each other about how things are going and if roles and expectations need to be adjusted. And I just always recommend that my clients, especially those who feel like they don't have as good of a support system as they'd like, to explore other options for support, whether that's support groups, mommy and me groups, or just staying connected to family or friends. Support is super important because it really is a lonely phase of life for a lot of us. So having that connection and just knowing that it's not just you, you're not alone, makes a big difference.
I love that. I think, honestly, Emily, something that I really struggled with was finding people who were like me during that postpartum period, especially being a self-employed mom. A lot of my employed counterparts had paid maternity leaves or were just kind of like kicking their feet up, for lack of a better term. And like I had a business to worry about and I had all of these other things that were happening. My husband was transitioning off of military salary and military benefits and operations agency. My company at the time was taking that on. And so it felt really, really challenging because I felt as if it was just coming from all fronts. And so I think encouraging moms to like build their community and know that they're not alone. I really do wish that I did that sooner. So for moms listening who are trying to conceive or pregnant currently and you're running a business, this is really going to be super duper helpful. I think for after you kind of go through some of the challenges in early postpartum to just have that community to lean on. I also love, Emily, that you brought up conversations with your partner because I want to double click on that for a quick second. I absolutely believe, and we've seen so many different things come up over the last few years, like the fair play movement and partner load share of the workload at home and all of those things. I think one of the things that Steve and I did really well in the beginning was have some of these conversations, but I actually don't think that we had enough specific conversations, like who was going to go to the grocery store or who was going to schedule the doctor's appointment. And then whenever we had a big full list of things, I just assumed all responsibility because I was always the house coordinator. He was in the military for a really long time and, was always out on trainings. And so I was always doing those types of things. So let's talk about how we can approach some of those conversations because it doesn't always have to be your partner, right? It can be a sister or a brother or a mother in law or someone like that. What types of conversations do we need to be having in kind of like pregnancy time to prepare us for postpartum?
Like we said, all those conversations around roles and support, what support's going to look like for you, what you need from other people. Sometimes we assume people know how to support us, but we know from like the love languages, the theory that people have different ways of giving and receiving love, and same way with support. So your mom might feel like her showing up unexpected with dinner is her way of showing support, and maybe that feels really intrusive to you. So we really have to be clear with people on what support means to us. And I always think those conversations are more productive when they're proactive rather than reactive. And often they are happen. These conversations are happening in the heat of the moment. So if you can kind of kick the can down the road and wait until things are a little bit cooled off before having these conversations or doing them proactively. But if you're already in the heat in the moment, try not to get into the nitty gritty of it when everyone's emotions are really high and have them at a later time when you're kind of cooled off. It's more likely to be a productive conversation.
That's really great advice. I think too, one of the struggles I had postpartum was I didn't know what I needed. So we had some conversations about, how things would be handled in the home and what type of parents we wanted to be and all those types of things. And then when I was in the heat of becoming a new mom and like bringing baby home and all the things, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think some things that I thought might be helpful, like someone showing up unexpectedly with dinner, actually did feel intrusive to me. And so if things need to change, I know you recommend or you just recommended waiting until stuff has cooled off or like an infraction has passed, but how do you step confidently into giving somebody feedback like that? I remember being so uncertain. I was like, am I doing this right? Am I doing what's best for my baby? Should I be just so thankful that they want to come and help, but it really doesn't feel like help? And so I was constantly worried about doing the right thing for our family and being a good mom, of course. I feel like that's everyone's worry in the beginning of being a mom. And also just like not hurting anybody's feelings.
That's something that comes up a lot, is this fear that we're going to hurt other people's feelings. So we don't say what we feel like we really need to say. You can't always help whether you hurt someone's feelings or not, so I encourage people to focus on what you can control, and that's the
Mm,
delivery, and that's the intention behind what you're saying. So if you're saying it clearly and from a place of love and kindness and appreciation and understanding that they are trying to do their best, but they just don't know how to support you, so you're going to share that information with them. You can't necessarily help if they take it the wrong way. You just want to feel confident in the way that you are delivering the message. And you can certainly practice it or run it by a couple of people to get some feedback if that helps. But we, if we're always worried that we're going to hurt someone's feelings, we're never going to speak up for ourselves.
that's wisdom. It is really hard. I want to just empathize so wholeheartedly with that process. I mean, delivering, you know, feedback or criticism to somebody who deep down is just trying to help you, but it just doesn't feel like the right thing. It can be hard to speak up. It can be hard to even believe that those emotions or your emotions are even valid. You're like, no, you're just being mean or you're just an angry postpartum person. I remember thinking that about myself at the time. But I think a lot of these strategies are going to be really supportive for, first of all, the women listening, and second of all, the women that you're, supporting through your practice. Emily, what's next for you? As we're kind of talking through this, it's early 2025. What's exciting for this year with your family and your business?
Well, in terms of my business, Phoenix Health, we're continuing to grow and expand our reach so that hopefully we can reach more families. We're able to serve a little over 40 states right now. So we hope to get up to 50. And we hope to expand our services too. Right now, we offer individual therapy, but we want to expand to offering group supports, some nutrition counseling, counseling, and other services that are going to be really helpful for postpartum families. And in terms of family, I think finally I feel like I'm in a phase of life where things are we're in more of a groove at home. So I'm actually looking forward to traveling this year because we put a lot of traveling plans on hold when the kids were younger, and I'm starting to feel like we can kind of handle it. So this year we're going to do more traveling, which we're super excited about.
Oh, that's fun. We just got back from a trip to Florida. And I will say a lot of hesitance in the beginning to travel with the kids. But now, since we've taken a handful of trips when the kids were little, they are so much more receptive to the change in environment and their schedules stay the same. So I'm excited for you guys to also experience that and be able to bond together outside of the home.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Emily. So if anyone is listening and they're like, either want to be proactive about their postpartum support, or maybe they're in the thick of postpartum and they're really thinking, wow, I should start to talk to somebody about some of the things that I'm going through, where can folks connect with you and get more information about Phoenix Health?
Yeah, our website is joinphoenixhealth.com. So you can go right there and we have all our information. You could even schedule a consultation right on our website.
That is incredible. Emily, any words of wisdom or final parting thoughts you want to share with moms who are listening who are in the thick of growing businesses and raising families?
I just want to say you're awesome. You're doing so many things all at the same time, and I know it's not easy and there are a lot of tough days, but on social media there's a lot of this narrative now around like it gets easier and then another camp that's saying it doesn't get easier. I really do truly believe it does get easier the more you grow and you kind of get into your groove and then your family's growing and getting into their groove. So if it's really hard now, I promise you it's not going to be this hard forever.
I love that. My father-in-law always said that it doesn't get easier, it just gets more spaced out. So, like, the problems are less frequent, but they might be more challenging. Whereas, like, in the beginning, there's always problems, but they're like little problems. It's like, oh, the baby needs to eat, but it's like a small problem. Anyway, I want to thank you so much for your time and for all of the wisdom that you shared here. I will link your information and ways to get in touch with you in the show notes. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. Honestly, I believe it's super important that moms get postpartum care that they deserve.